right, everybody. Good, merry Thursday evening to you all, and welcome to Escape Your Self-Made Matrix. Thank you guys for joining tonight's masterclass. Man, have I been excited about this masterclass all week and have been setting up this material for quite some time, so it feels like a bit of one of those creative birthing moments to finally get to present this to you guys. I got the Matrix themed background set up. Hopefully you guys are in a Matrix mood tonight because we're going to tumble down the rabbit hole, my friends. And just to give a quick preface to what I'm going to talk about tonight, a lot of you guys know I released my first book last year, The 3 Beliefs of Ego. And here in 4D University, we have a whole series of courses and curriculum that try to package what I feel are the most powerful, potent teachings that I can offer anybody for the path to 4th density, to truly graduating from this realm of 3rd density consciousness, or as we're going to be terming it from now on, the matrix of 3D consciousness. And as a spiritual teacher, it's been somewhat of a challenge to pull together all the different things I teach into one cohesive structure. Because if you guys follow me, then you know quite well that I like to teach an amalgamation of things. And I like to come at the spiritual path from different angles and perspectives. I incorporate a lot of different traditions, a lot of different texts that have benefited me. And then I try to simplify and systematize those teachings and that knowledge into a packaged format that is simple for the average person to digest and, most importantly, apply to their life and integrate. Because integration is the name of the game if we're going to graduate to the 4th density. And so tonight, if you're familiar with all my core teachings here, if you're a 4DU student or you've been following me for a while, then you're going to see a lot of the staple teachings that you've heard me teach about for a long time. The polarities, the 3 beliefs of ego, of course, spiritual balancing, and so forth. But kind of packaged in a new way because my understanding is always evolving and I'm always coming up or discovering better ways to explain these things. And coming across this material of kind of the whole Matrix analogy, I did a bunch of Matrix themed videos years ago when I started YouTube, probably in 2019. And I just think the Matrix is, first of all, it's my favorite movie of all time, but it's just the best motion picture analogy that I think humanity has ever created for accurately describing the metaphysics of our world. And in fact, sometimes I'll say that if you want to understand the cosmology of our universe really well, watch Star Wars. Because Star Wars, I think, nails it in terms of the 2 polarities. And of course, they have their own terms, right? Jedi, Sith, the Force, right? The light and the dark side. But I mean, even Dawn asks Ra this question in the Law of One, is our universe somewhat like Star Wars? And Ra's like, yeah, actually it is. There's planetary civilizations. They travel around to interact with other civilizations, and there's only 2 polarities one can be a part of in this universe: the Jedi or the Sith, light and the dark, right? So that's our cosmology. But what about our metaphysics? And, you know, we could say the psychological landscape of the human realm. What is the best movie analogy for that? It's the Matrix, hands down. And so tonight, we're going to be weaving in a lot of the teachings you guys are familiar with into the Matrix theme and analogy. And actually, let me open up the chat here really quick because I would love to hear where you guys are from, where you guys are tuning in from tonight. I see North Carolina. I see a couple North Carolina, actually. New Jersey. Anybody from out of the country? Just curious. I know time zones becomes difficult, but put in the chat. Let me know where you're dropping in from tonight. Australia. All right, nice. It's probably morning your time, I would imagine. Yeah, early morning. Brazil, nice. Good to see our South American brothers and sisters here. Chicago, California, Toronto, Florida. Epic. Well, we are all part of one great mind, no matter where we're tuning in from tonight. And that's what we're going to be diving into a little bit tonight as well, is this whole concept of that A Course in Miracles teaches, that all minds are joined. And this is the first principle for really understanding the Matrix. I've been working with an amazing woman named Tria for the last, well, I started working with her last year and she took a bit of a hiatus, but she's helped me to condense a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight in terms of just the conceptual framework of things like detrimental structures of consciousness and selves and software and these kind of terms we're going to be using tonight. And so I think we're going to have a lot of fun in this conversation. So without further ado, we do have, a couple of hours together. So I'd like to get started because we've got a walloper of a presentation to get through. So I'm going to share my screen. There we go. Okay, nice. And I also want to disclose something at the start of tonight's masterclass, which is that this masterclass tonight is actually just kind of a teaser for a brand new live 8-week course called Escape Your Self-Made Matrix, which will be starting next month in March. And I could not be more excited for this, you guys. I've been building this course for quite a while. And as you're going to see tonight, this is a very nutrient-dense subject that we're going to get into. And you're going to be learning a lot of new terms and concepts tonight. So if it feels a little bit like you are drinking from a fire hose, that's okay. Don't worry about, needing to capture every single concept and thing that's said tonight. You're going to have access to this replay after tonight to watch it back as many times as you want. But as some of you know, these free masterclasses I do are sort of my way of putting my courses on my audience's radar. Because man, in our current kind of era we're living in, social media, the internet, we're just getting blasted with millions of pieces of content a day. And most people are sort of hopelessly addicted to doom scrolling on their phone and hunting for the next dopamine hit, which makes it really hard to get people's attention to say, hey, I've got something that you might want to take a look at. So in any case, this is my method for doing that, is just to put out a free masterclass where I can kind of get the attention of anyone out there who's on this same frequency, which of course is why all of you guys are here tonight. And to just say, hey, I've put together this powerful new program that I think is going to be of great service to you and hopefully help you smash through your current spiritual plateaus. So if you find tonight's conversation interesting, if you are pulled by this conversation or feel a resonance with it, and you want to go deeper into this work we're going to discuss tonight, that's exactly what I'm going to be offering you guys at the end of tonight's presentation. And in addition to that, I have some really exciting news on that front, which is that this entire program will be available in our student membership, which is just $44 a month. And tonight, we're actually also offering a special discount where you're going to get access to 40U for $7 for the first 2 weeks if you join tonight. And again, it's always a month-to-month membership, so the ball is always in your court in that regard. But you'll get access to not just this program, but all of our programs, all the courses I've made in 40 University, because I've really just felt called, to be honest with you guys, to just kind of scale things down a bit and put everything I've created into just one simple, low-cost month-to-month membership so that as many people as possible can access this material. Because I believe that our world is in some dire straits right now, and we need this information more than ever, and I want people to have access to it. So I'll be giving you guys more details on what the 8-week program will look like at the end of the presentation. And we'll put the discount link for that, I think, in the chat below. It should be linked or pinned there somewhere. And then we'll do a little bit of Q&A at the end of tonight's presentation. But with that being said, even if you don't, want to take the full 8-week deep dive with me in this material, you're still going to get a ton of value from this masterclass tonight. And I think hopefully a much deeper and new perspective on the spiritual path that will simplify and systematize the process of spiritual awakening in a way that you haven't seen before. And as a teacher, that's what I love to do most, to simplify and systematize. So just a word of warning, we might very well go longer than 2 hours tonight, but I promise that I'm going to make it worth every second of your time. So with that being said, strap in your seatbelts and get ready to swallow some red pills, my friends. And let's see how deep the rabbit hole goes, yeah? So, as we know, if you've seen The Matrix, if you haven't, this entire masterclass is one gigantic spoiler alert. But Morpheus has some pretty epic bars in The Matrix, as we know. And one of the most memorable lines is when he meets with Neo for the first time, and he says, what is the Matrix? He says, it is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth, a prison for your mind. So the Matrix, as we're using this term tonight, is humanity's collective ego consciousness. And in that regard, it's really not much different from the matrix that's pictured in the movie itself. It is not merely a concept, but a living structure that sustains itself by feeding on the minds that created it. And so, although I'm going to be giving you a lot of kind of the sort of matrix style shock material tonight, please understand I mean to provoke no fear whatsoever. This is not a fear-based perspective at all. It's just a bit of a reality check of, hey, let's just get honest about the world we currently live in. Because if you incarnated onto this planet, your soul knew what it was signing up for, to, maybe for lack of a better term, come to a prison planet, a psychological prison planet that is captured by powerful egregore structures in consciousness that enslave the minds of the masses. And there's no question about this, right? We see this in our world all over the place, all over the news, all over the internet. And that's why I think Jesus said in the Gospel of Thomas, whoever has come to know the world has discovered a corpse. Meaning everyone's kind of like a zombie. Everyone's just sleepwalking in the matrix. There's very few awakened beings on our planet. And obviously, if you're even interested in this material, if you've even come to this masterclass tonight, then you're one of those few that is awake to some extent to the matrix, the corpse world that you're living in. But Jesus goes on to say that, and whoever has discovered the world as a corpse, to that one, the world is not worthy. And what Jesus means by that is that that person has transcended the third density world. It is not worthy of that person, meaning it is not of the same frequency any longer. And so now that liberated being, the one, as it is pictured in the matrix, can help set free the other enslaved minds. And that is actually what A Course in Miracles says our entire job is, right? To be the savior of the world. But where do we save the world is the big question. Do we run around and telling everyone, shaking them by the shoulders and saying, hey, wake up, you're asleep in the matrix, dummy? Or perhaps is it more of an inside job? And that's why tonight's masterclass is titled, Escape Your Self-Made Matrix. It is a matrix or a prison for your mind, as Morpheus says. And this is what ACIM teaches, that the world is in your mind. The world you see is a thought you think. It's your perception of reality. And your perception of reality is not at all the same thing as reality itself. Your perception imposes all sorts of judgments and biases and sort of layers it on top of reality and then thinks that those projections are the real world. And that's the matrix. And we're going to get deeper into that as we go along. So to give you a quick cheat sheet for the analogies we're using tonight with the matrix, Neo from the movie represents, obviously, our human self that is trapped in the matrix, the ego, before we wake up. The one represents our Christ nature. Morpheus represents the Holy Spirit, which Jesus called the helper who comes to lead and guide you into all truth, which is definitely the role that Morpheus plays for Neo, right? The machines in the matrix are the detrimental structures of consciousness, or egregores, or archons, which we're going to talk about tonight. The agents of the matrix represent the ego's many selves, the guardians of the matrix. And then the code of the matrix represents the software programs that run our minds unaware. So if you've seen the matrix, then you remember that the agents, really it's Agent Smith who takes the lead role. The agent's job is to make sure nobody wakes up and breaks free from the matrix. And that is exactly what the ego and its many different mini selves does in our own mind, as we're going to see. In my book, The Three Beliefs of Ego, I give a couple of definitions for what the ego is as I see it. But the first one and the most kind of working definition I give is that the ego is the mental activity of identifying with form. I am this, I am that. And every time the mind says, I am this, I am that, in whatever capacity, a new self is created. So the ego is not just one singular entity locked in the skull. It is actually a mental program of identifying, and that act of identifying, which goes on interminably in everybody, creates all these different selves or agents that then become the guardians of those programs, right? Your insecurities, your fears, your biases, your need to be right, and all these things belong to the myriad of egos that is in our mind. So Neo, seeing through the code at the end of the Matrix, which we're going to watch that scene briefly, represents the unlocking of Christ vision. which is the term from A Course in Miracles, where we no longer project onto reality, but we see it as it truly is. And behold, the kingdom of heaven, which Jesus said is already here within you and outside of you and spread out across the earth, but men are unaware of it. So, key question, how does the matrix, which is purely metaphysical, make its way into the physical world and control all of human civilization? This is an interesting question, isn't it? How does that which is non-physical somehow enter into and control all that is physical? And it happens through the following architecture, which we're going to unpack at length tonight. First, we have the matrix, which is the collective unconscious, as Carl Jung termed it, humanity's collective ego. And then beneath that are the detrimental structures, the collective belief systems of human beings. And that represents the machines from the matrix, right? And then those detrimental structures create selves in our mind in their own image and likeness, which act like the agents, the internal enforcers of the matrix. And then those agents or selves create and run their own software programs in our minds, which is kind of the code of the matrix, right? We see Agent Smith, for example. Actually, all the agents can appear anywhere that there's code, right? This is why it's difficult in the matrix to escape from the agents, because you can run away from them, but they can just materialize in some human body down the street, right? The Neo and Trinity are like running through the streets, and people that are like carrying grocery bags all of a sudden turn into an agent, and they're right there in their face again. So it's like you can't escape them, right? Wherever the code is, the agent can be, because the agent is part of the code. It swims in it, yeah? And then our software programs that run our mind and keep us trapped in the matrix are really only visible to us through what's called sequences. These are the actual behavioral loops, right, of the programs themselves. A software program is non-physical. You can't see it. You can't point to a software program in your head. Even if I ask you, hey, John, what software programs do you have? You're just going to have to make up an answer, right? Because you can't know for sure. You can't see them. But what you can see, which is going to be the liberation access point tonight that we'll discuss, are the sequences of the programs that they run through your behaviors, which, as we're going to see together, all sequences follow one simple, constant, identifiable pattern: lack, attachment, and control. All software programs follow this same formula, which is why it makes it very easy once you understand the sequence, lack, attachment, control, makes it very easy to identify these programs as they operate, and then begin to break free from the matrix. So what are detrimental structures? This is going to be, if you guys haven't studied this subject before, this is going to be exceptionally interesting for you. Let's put it that way. In Logion 2 of the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus said, "Those who seek should not stop seeking until they find. And when they find, they will be disturbed. And when they are disturbed, they will marvel. And then they will rule or reign over the all." So Jesus here is describing a picture-perfect sequence of waking up from the matrix. Just like Neo, right? At first, you find out you're in a matrix. Whoa, super disturbing. Worst case scenario. I'm being harvested by machines. But then when you're disturbed, you find it all to be, after a while, kind of amazing. And then you find your empowerment in that matrix and say, wait a minute, I don't actually have to be a slave of the matrix. And you marvel at that. And then eventually you gain your empowerment and your sovereignty as a spiritual being, and you come to rule over the matrix as Neo does. So pretty amazing, yeah? 2,000 years ago, Jesus already understood this exact kind of hero's journey we're talking about tonight. So detrimental structures of consciousness are the building blocks of the matrix, discrete, self-perpetuating metaphysical constructs within the collective unconscious. So in other words, these are actual metaphysical structures, my friends, that exist in the astral plane that could be visible to you. Were you able to astral project to the non-physical realm, you could see what these egregores, these structures, look like as they harvest the energy of human civilization. And we're going to talk about what they are, the different kinds of structures, but each one is a crystallized belief system, which is formed when enough minds collectively invest in the same illusion that takes on a life of its own. So here's the simple metaphysics of this, guys. Whatever is not based in truth is an illusion. This is obvious. But whatever is an illusion, therefore, cannot exist by itself. There are three criterion for an illusion when we use this term. And this is something people get messed up a lot, right? In non-duality and spiritual circles, is when we say something's an illusion, the ego mind pictures that as us saying like, oh, it's just this total nonsense, ignore it, dismiss it, it doesn't even matter. And nothing could be further from the truth. Illusions are extremely powerful and have extremely severe consequences. And yet they don't actually exist, but therein lies their secret power, is that they seem to exist based on three criterion. They are not eternal, meaning they have a beginning and an ending. Even the Matrix says that, right? Everything that has a beginning has an ending. They undergo change and evolution. They're in a state of flux. And third, they are not self-sufficient, meaning an illusion depends on something other than itself in order to exist. The simplest definition, or sorry, analogy that I give for an illusion is a shadow. If a shadow is on the ground, we're all in the same room, we can all point to it and say, oh, there's the shadow. And if I say, hey guys, that shadow doesn't exist, it's an illusion. Some of you might say, oh, come on, Aaron, are you trying to gaslight us right now? We all see the shadow right there on the ground. You must be insane or something. But what I mean when I say the shadow doesn't exist is, hey, why don't somebody go over there and try to grab onto that shadow? Somebody bring that shadow over here. Let's weigh it on a scale. And of course, we find as we approach the shadow, there's nothing objective at all that we can quantify about it. So it's there, but it's not there. Yeah? And that's because a shadow requires these three things. A shadow needs light being shined from some direction, right? There needs to be an object that obscures the light, and there needs to be a flat surface for the shadow to cast itself on. And only when you get all three of those things do you get a shadow. So this is the nature of an illusion. It seems to be there, and it has powerful effects if you believe in it. But illusions disappear when they are seen for what they are. So like parasitic programs, they cannot sustain themselves independently. They require continuous human mental and emotional energy to survive. They do this by housing portions of every individual's consciousness, like an investment in the stock market holds a portion of an investor's portfolio. So it's almost like when you believe in these detrimental structures, when you source from them, common human belief systems like us versus them, the lack mentality, and so forth. You are actually, like an investment, sort of investing part of your consciousness in that structure and giving it permission to harvest your loosh, as it's often called, your mental energy, your prana. And the more detrimental structures you outsource to, the more fragmented and distorted your quality of consciousness becomes. So that's why we want to learn how to exit these structures. The more minds that subscribe to a given structure, the larger and more influential it becomes, binding those who feed it into recurring cycles of lack, attachment, and control. Because remember, that's the only sequence that these structures can perform in our mind. Morpheus says, you have to understand most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inured, so hopelessly dependent on the system that they will fight to protect it. I should have read that like in Morpheus's voice. But they will even fight to protect it. That's pretty good, actually. So here's how they work. More minds investing in a structure equals a stronger structure. Super simple, yeah? Fewer minds equals a weaker structure. So I'm going to give you an example here. A detrimental structure would be like, my value depends on what I do. And I use this one because this is one that I've struggled with for a long time. And I'm going to be unpacking a little bit later how I came to identify this detrimental structure. But the key insight is they grow stronger with every mind that subscribes, and the reverse, they weaken with every mind that exits. So that's what A Course in Miracles means when it says, you are the savior of the world. Because all minds are joined, when you exit an illusion, which is the Course's term for a detrimental structure, you make it more easy for everyone else to exit it, even if just 0.1%. Because we're all joined. We are one collective consciousness. As the law of one teaches, we are a social memory complex. We are a group mind, in other words. And so every single one of us that is outsourcing to a structure is making it a little bit easier or more likely for others to invest in that structure. It's like a black hole, right? It begins to gain more mass the more people believe in it. So that's why you saving yourself, you escaping your own self-made matrix, you make it more possible for everyone in the world to escape their own. And if you study the Hawkins scale, you know that what David Hawkins showed is that consciousness is logarithmic as it ascends in frequency. So the higher you raise your frequency, the exponential effects you have positively on the planet. So I think, for example, a person who calibrates at 500 LOC, which is the level of love, the fourth density consciousness, the heart chakra. I believe David Hawkins says they are offsetting 750,000 people who are calibrating below 200. So in other words, one person who calibrates at 500 is producing as much energy and consciousness as 750,000 people below 200. So there's a logarithmic kind of exponential leap that happens as we ascend in consciousness. All right, so if you have ever heard of the term Archons or egregores, this is exactly what we're talking about tonight. And I want to unpack this a bit because it'll help us see that many ancient civilizations and religious structures have identified detrimental structures in their own words and in their own terms, but this is a very ancient concept that people have been tapped into for quite some time. But that, to be honest with you, doesn't get talked a lot about in spiritual circles these days. So what are archons? Well, in Gnostic Christianity, archons, which comes from the Greek word archon, meaning ruler, are the builders and enforcers of the material world. So Gnosticism is the most extreme dualistic spiritual philosophy that's ever been invented, at least as far as I've seen. I've never found a more dualistic spiritual philosophy than Gnosticism. I mean, it's very extreme. Matter, for example, is inherently evil and completely separate from spirit. Spirit is inherently good and completely separate from matter. And we are trapped here by an evil demigod named Yaldabaoth, who is a demiurge pretending to be Yahweh and imprisoning our souls here in this kind of matter matrix. So the Gnostics very much believed in all the things we're talking about tonight, but they literalized it into the physical world and didn't realize that it's actually a psychological matrix, or spiritual if you prefer, more so than anything. So the Gnostics believed that they were created by the demiurge, Yaldabaoth, an ignorant or malevolent lesser god who mistakenly believes he is the supreme being. The Archons are the cosmic jailers. Their job is to keep human souls asleep and tethered to the material matrix so that they never realize their true divine origin. They are often described as inorganic, spiritual, parasitic, and lacking enoia, creative intentionality. They operate through duality, law and fear. So what are egregores? In metaphysical lore, specifically Western Hermeticism and Theosophy, an egregore is an autonomous group mind. So an egregore is created when a group of people focus their mental and emotional energy toward a specific idea, or a deity, or an institution. It is a crystallized belief system that takes on a life of its own. Once born, an egregore acts to sustain its own existence, as all negatively polarized entities do, yeah? It influences the thoughts and behaviors of its members to ensure they keep feeding it energy. It is a psychic parasite. If the group stops believing or feeding it, the egregore starves and eventually dissolves. So as A Course in Miracles says, illusions disappear when they are recognized for what they are. Believe them not, and they are gone. One of the best lines in the Course, man. So the question is, did the Gnostics mistake egregores for archons? The Gnostics observed that human society was dominated by rulers, archons, that seemed to exist beyond physical individuals, systems like the Roman Empire, the temple cult, or rigid legalism. Gnostics believed the archons were planetary, but that those planets were often metaphors for mental states, greed, lust, and pride, etc. These are exactly how egregores operate. They are collective mental software programs that govern human behavior. So both Archons and Egregores require human battery power, emotional distress, worship, fear in order to survive. So as somebody who's studied Gnosticism quite a bit, even at a master's degree level, it is my opinion that the Gnostics were definitely mistaking Archons for Egregores. In other words, they typified or projected them to be real pre-existent entities. I think I have a slide on this. Yeah. So they suggested that these were pre-existing rulers, objective parts of the flawed universe, whereas egregore theory suggests that we create these structures through our collective lack of awareness. So it's clear that what the Gnostics called Archons were actually gargantuan egregores of the ancient world. The Roman Empire, for example, Roman Orthodox Christianity, for example. The Gnostics mistook egregores, detrimental structures, to be real living spiritual entities who pre-exist. This is an understandable mistake, for when a belief system like a state religion or social hierarchy becomes powerful enough, it stops looking like a thought and starts looking like a thing, or a god, or a ruler. So as with almost everything the Gnostics taught, I'm so fascinated by the Gnostics, man, because they pretty much got everything wrong in their final conclusion. Like where they end up arriving in their conclusion, I would say, no, that's just not accurate. Sorry. But everything leading up to that is basically right. So these first Gentile Christians, were very much tapped into real metaphysics and were, in my opinion, much more awake to the reality of our universe than anything the Orthodox, Roman Catholic Christians were. So they were the kind of populist Christian movement that the Roman Catholic Church fought against for hundreds of years. And the Gnostics very much outnumbered Roman Orthodox Christians for at least a century or so before empire, state power, started to back Orthodox Christianity and eventually kind of exterminated the Gnostics. But the Gnostics were pretty tapped into a lot of things, man. Even though they might come to some wacky conclusions, I think that their only problem was physicalizing everything rather than looking to the metaphysical realm to draw their conclusions. So in any case, let's look at some examples of egregores. First and foremost, no-brainer, religion. When a massive collective of minds invest their spiritual sovereignty into a specific dogma, hierarchy, or historical narrative, they manifest the most ancient and dense of all egregores, religion. It is a structure designed to mediate between the human and the divine, often becoming a gatekeeper that prevents the very direct connection it claims to facilitate. So I'm going to read these at the bottom here. I know it's pretty small on your screen, but it says, zealotry, fear of judgment, and belonging. This egregore or structure is fed by the deep human need for cosmic safety and the terror of being cast out or eternally lost. It harvests the energy of devotion and fear, but also the shadow energies of guilt and shame. So let's talk about the self or agent that religion creates. Religion creates the pious self or pious agent, a self-righteous agent that patrols your thoughts for heresy or sin. I interact with or interface with pious agents every day on Instagram in my comment section. So every post I make about Christianity, you'll see in the comments is just filled with people that are completely outsourced to these religious egregores. This agent will even prioritize the survival of the institution over the actual teachings of its founder. And this is not just true for Christianity, y'all, but for many other religions. It is the reason religious people can commit acts of exclusion or hatred while believing that they are serving the light. So egregores cause a split mind, as we can see. Let's talk about the sequence. Remember, all sequences are lack attachment control. This structure operates under the mediator sequence. It convinces the individual that they are fundamentally broken or separate from God. There's your lack, right? I'm separate from God. I'm unworthy of God's love. And then it attaches their salvation to a specific set of rituals or beliefs. So then the mind has to become attached to whatever dogmas the priest or the bishop or the pastor says. Here's how you can solve this lack, this separation. Believe these creeds that we tell you to believe in. And then it enforces strict behavioral codes to maintain institutional purity. So then you behave like a fundamentalist zealot, right? You judge people, you heresy hunt, you act self-righteous, all the things we know of religion. So can you see that right there? There's the lack attachment control sequence that the religious egregore and selves run in people's minds. That's the matrix. What about national state egregores? When a group of people invest their identity into a nation state, they create a massive egregore. Nationalism, patriotism, and the willingness to die for the flag. The self or agent this creates is a nationalistic self who sees your nation as being more important or superior to all others. And then the sequence, this egregore thrives on us versus them. It possesses individuals, turning them into agents of the state who will enforce laws or go to war, even if it contradicts all morality and ethics. So this is what all war is predicated upon, right? This nationalistic structure in people's minds. My country's better than your country, and so I'm justified in attacking you. And even your innocent civilians have to pay the price so that my country can thrive. I think we've seen a whole lot of this recently, right? With the Israel, Palestine, and Russia, Ukraine, and all these things. This is the way of the world. This is a normal egregore that the majority of the planet sources from. Then there's the corporate egregores, right? High-level corporations like Apple, Disney, Google are not just buildings with employees. They are psychic entities. Brand loyalty and the corporate culture. Your time and creative life force are the primary batteries for these structures. These egregores harvest employee energy. People often adopt a work self that is entirely different from their normal self to serve the needs of the corporate egregores' quarterly growth. So there's another example. Then there's the stock market. The global economy is one of the most powerful Archon level egregores in that it looks like a real living entity, right? It harvests the collective confidence and fear in it. The market has no physical body, but it panics, which is lack, yeah, like a real person. It makes demands, attachments, and it sacrifices, which is control. Anyone who doesn't feed it adequately through, laying them off, fires, companies going bankrupt, foreclosures, the market will sacrifice you, destroy you basically, if you don't serve it enough. Another perfect example of an egregore. But what about the more subtle structures, like collective belief systems that are a little more subtle to detect? Let's look at the scarcity structure. This program turns you into a predator self. It is the back-end code for every war, every corporate buyout, and every argument over fairness. It keeps you from realizing the abundance of the one. So the belief is there's not enough to go around for everyone. So I need to take from life, take from others to get my needs met. So if you study the 40U curriculum with us here, that's the taking and keeping, right? There's giving and receiving, which is positive polarity. And there's taking and keeping, which is negative polarity. And there is no crossover. So this belief causes the taking and keeping pattern. I've got to take from people, take whatever I need to get from whom I can get it from. Step on the little guy, step on anyone in my way to get my needs met because there isn't enough to go around. That's the scarcity structure that 99% of humans source from, right? So the sequence there is pretty obvious. Then there's the performance structure or egregore. My value is determined by my output, my status, or my utility to others. Man, does this one dominate the world, right? People are freaking plugged into this one, dude. This is the achiever agent. It patrols your mind at night, reminding you of what you didn't get done. It keeps you busy so you never have the Christ vision to see the matrix. So the sequence here is the lack of inherent worthiness. So I'm not worthy as I am. I lack worthiness. Therefore, I'm attached to validation, awards, titles. These things is what fulfills my lack. Therefore, I need to be a workaholic. I need to be a perfectionist. I need to rise and grind to make sure I'm valuable today because I'm not valuable as I inherently am. Another huge egregore, right? Then there's unworthiness. I'm fundamentally flawed or unworthy of love. And if people saw the real me, they would reject me. So there's a lot of crossover with these egregores, even though they have somewhat different distinctions between them. This one creates a kind of protector agent. It sabotages intimacy to protect you from the pain of rejection. So this is the fear of rejection egregore in a sense. It is the reason humans stay plugged in to shallow structures, because they're too afraid to stand naked in the light of the source. So I lack connection to others. Therefore, I'm attached to validation. Therefore, I need to control people through wearing masks, shape-shifting, and people-pleasing. Right? I'm going to get your validation of me by shape-shifting into whoever I think you want me to be so that you like me. This is another huge egregore. And then we went over to the us versus them structure. And then there's the external savior egregore. Man, this is a big one too. The belief is that someone else, whether it's a guru, a politician, a spouse, some distant god, is coming to fix my life and save my soul. So this is the victim agent. It keeps you in a state of perpetual waiting. It ensures you never take the red pill of sovereignty because you're waiting for someone else to hand it to you. So it's a lack of power, which creates an attachment to one side or one person who you think has the power you lack. And then it creates control-based behaviors from that of submission to that person or political side or whatever. You outsource to them and you become defensive about them. There's your sequence, yeah? See if this works. I have a YouTube video here. So here's the famous scene of Neo waking up in the Matrix.
So sure it was real. Have you ever?
Okay, so check this out. This is interesting, right? If you remember from the movie here, how does Neo wake up from the Matrix? He looks into his reflection in the mirror, and then he attempts to touch his reflection. Isn't that an obvious analogy for spiritual awakening? Let's see what happens.
Have you ever had a dream, Neo, that you were so sure was real? What if you were unable to wake from that dream? How would you know the difference between the dream world and the real world? This can't be. Be what? Be real?
It's going into replication.
Hey, Pop. Still nothing. Let's go. Let's go. Tank, we're going to need a signal soon.
Got a fibrillation.
APOC, location. Targeting almost there.
It's going into arrest.
Lock, I got him. Now, Tank, now.
Anyone ever felt like that before? That's pretty dead on what spiritual awakening feels like sometimes, doesn't it? Like, what in the F is going on? I've got all these hooks and cords in me. I have to rip them out. It's painful. It's traumatizing. It's scary. I mean, this is a great analogy for what it feels like to wake up from the Matrix. So can you blame anybody who doesn't want to wake up? Not really, right? I mean, obviously they're going to have to wake up at some point, but I mean, people are suffering, man. And some people are just not ready to wake up, as Morpheus says. How do we go forward here? Sorry, guys. I'm learning on the fly here. There we go. No, that's not it. All right. So this is a bit of a redefining of the ego. The ego is not a single entity, as we said. It is the sum total of every self operating within you, an entire network of agents or selves, running their programs simultaneously, each one serving a different detrimental structure, each one keeping you plugged into the matrix. And now, sometimes you have multiple selves serving the same detrimental structures, but suffice to say, this is kind of the working model, right? So as the Course in Miracles says, all minds are joined. So I'd like you to start seeing the ego not as just a program in your mind, right? But actually a program running the entire collective of human civilization. There is one ego that governs all human beings. It is the superego, right? And we are all sourcing from that ego, which is the matrix in the analogy we're using tonight. And that's why every human has the same basic needs, basic behavioral patterns, ways of thinking, modes of operating, because we're all sharing the same ego. And this is the critical mass or collective mass I was describing. In order to show you or demonstrate that this is the truth, let's use an analogy. Let me ask you all a question. Let me pose a question to you, and I want to see your response in the chat. If you were born into this planet and every single person you ever met from childhood was fully enlightened, Christ level enlightenment, Buddha level enlightenment, every person you ever encountered or interacted with was the Buddha in that sense, do you think you could have an ego? What do you guys think? You guys are thinking hard on this one, huh? All right, Doug got it. The answer is unquestionably no. Right? You are the sum total of the social hierarchy you interact with. We are all connected to each other. And so the way we all are affects everyone else. Everything is dependent on everything else. And so when billions of humans believe the same detrimental ideas, don't you think it makes it a lot easier for you to believe those ideas? I mean, this is part of awakening, right? Is realizing I was born into a world that told me, for example, that vaccines create health in the body. I was told that processed food is real food. You know, you were lied to about these things. And so you had no chance at avoiding them until you were older and could wake up. If every single person you met, who you'd ever met, including your parents, were fully enlightened, you would be enlightened by, age 5 or something. This is just the way it works. You would have no other option because you would have to conform to the collective consciousness around you. You would have no other reference point. Right? You would have never seen somebody act like an ego. You would have never seen a detrimental belief in action. So you wouldn't be able to develop one yourself. So this is why enlightened civilizations stay enlightened as evolution progresses, because there's a power to the collective consciousness. It sources from itself and it grows in power over time. But it can do that to the positive or to the negative. So let's continue. So let's talk about agents. Selves, as we've said, are the internal enforcers generated by the structures to keep you in line. They are the identities created from a perception of lack of safety, lack of love or worth or control. From a single perception of lack, a self is born not to actually help you, but to protect the structure that it is sourcing from or created from. So this is the key to selves, is that they seem to be isolated from the whole, from their perspective, right? A self thinks that it's separate from the whole. In fact, it doesn't even know about the whole. It only knows about itself. And so the part, which is the self, serves itself at the cost of the whole. Meaning one of the ego's selves in your mind, such as one of your insecurities, right? You're insecure about your physical appearance, let's say. So that's a self, right? I have a self that is insecure about my appearance. And so whenever I have to take my shirt off in public, that self gets really antsy. It initiates a program, right? That program has a certain sequence where it tries to avoid being seen shirtless. And all these behaviors tumble down the trail, yeah? So that self can't know that behavior sequence is detrimental to the whole, right? It can't know that that's a detrimental behavior pattern for you. It can only know what protects me from harm, what protects me from the lack I experienced in my past. Maybe as a kid, you were made fun of in the pool because you were chubby or something. Whenever you went through life and experienced a trauma, all trauma is based in some kind of lack. Whatever your mind decided was lacking in that moment, it then created a self that could cope with that lack. It created a self that could cope with the reality of living in a world with that kind of lack. There's a lack of acceptance in this world. People will make fun of me if I take my shirt off at the pool. So I have to always swim with my shirt on. There's just so many examples we could go through, but you see the point. As Morpheus says, I've seen an agent punch through a concrete wall. They are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors. They are holding all the keys. But he says, he continues to say, they are still based in sourcing from the matrix, which means they can never be as powerful as you can be. He tells that to Neo, right? So that's what an agent is like. It's very powerful when you interact with it from its own level, the matrix. But when you transcend the matrix, as we'll watch Neo do, and you achieve spiritual balance, which is the key to exiting the matrix and accessing Christ's vision, the agent becomes nothing to you. You can easily combat, as Neo does, performing all this judo without any breath of effort on your part. That's what that scene in the Matrix really symbolizes, is true spiritual balance is true power over the matrix. So if detrimental structures are the machines of the matrix, then selves are its agents, the agents of the ego. Selves are the internal enforcers that each structure generates within your individual consciousness to keep you in line. They are all the mental identities we have created for various reasons, as we said. A self forms at a specific moment when your mind interprets a situation as meaning that something is missing. From that single perception of lack, a new self is born, a construct designed not to help you, but to protect and perpetuate the structure that created it. So I'm repeating some of these things just because these concepts are new to a lot of you guys, and you kind of need to hear them a few times so they can sink in. So again, here's the loop. As we've said, lack gives birth to a self, attachment defines its goal, and control drives its behavior. And then round and round the loop we go. Anytime that lack is triggered, the sequence initiates again. So each self operates by running a continuous behavioral sequence, a loop of lack, attachment, and control that reinforces the false belief at the core of its parent structure. Like Agent Smith, selves do not think, reflect, or question, that is, outside of their programming. They simply enforce. They patrol your consciousness for any thought or experience that might threaten the structure they serve, and they actively seek out evidence that confirms its core belief, even fabricating connections that aren't there or don't hold up to rational scrutiny. So selves look for constant evidence for their beliefs, right? And they're going to find evidence, even if there's no evidence there, as we know, right? This is why when you're not inside of an egregore, like when I left Christianity, for example, all of a sudden I'm like, yo, guys, none of y'all's beliefs make a lick of sense, dude. This is crazy. How do you guys believe this stuff? I mean, this is just nonsense city. Everywhere I look, these beliefs are crazy to me. But to them, they're completely rational, and they think I'm the crazy one. Funny how that works, right? When you change the way you look at something, the thing you look at changes. That's because selves will always collect evidence, whether true or false, to support their beliefs. So just like agents in the film, selves turn hostile the moment you begin to question them. The closer you get to seeing through the illusion, the more aggressively they fight to pull you back in. They are the mental bodyguards of the detrimental structures, created in their image and likeness, designed to keep your consciousness trapped within them. So remember the question I asked at the beginning? How does that which is metaphysical interface and control that which is physical? This is the link of chain of cause and effect. The matrix itself, the collective ego of humanity, it's filled with all these detrimental structures, core belief systems. And then when you believe or agree with these detrimental structures, that detrimental structure has a psychic connection into your mind, a tunnel into your mind, where it starts to create selves in its image and likeness, little miniature egos, right? That then fight for their survival and act like the agents in the Matrix. The way that the agents are depicted in the Matrix is so perfect because it's like, as long as you're completely plugged into the Matrix, they just look like a nice guy, well-dressed in a suit. You know, they're polite to you and they'll lead you right through the Matrix and give you a tour and all that stuff. But man, the second you start to question them or they think you're waking up, out come the guns, right? And they start chasing you down and trying to plug you back in. That's what selves do in our mind. So here's another analogy from the movie.
You. Yes, me. Me, me, me. Me too.
Me too. So you see there, Agent Smith made a copy of himself. So this is what selves try to do, right? They try to self-replicate. They try to take over as much of your mind as possible. And anything that's code, remember, the agent has power over. So now let's start to talk about how to decode the matrix through software programs and accessing Christ consciousness. So again, the phenomenon of agent possession is another big analogy in the movie for how software programs work. Software programs are the operational code of the selves, the specific mental algorithms each self generates to execute its sequence and enforce the will of its parent structure. They are the if this, then that commands running beneath your awareness, the mechanisms responsible for what triggers you, what emotional reactions fire, and what destructive patterns you compulsively act out. The larger the self, the more programs it produces, creating an ever-expanding web of automatic responses designed to keep you locked into cycles of suffering. So if you watched all 3 Matrix movies, then you know that by the 3rd Matrix movie, Agent Smith, kind of like a virus, has self-replicated through the entire Matrix itself. They've taken over every human being on planet Earth, and it's all just one great Agent Smith self running the Matrix world. This is kind of like the goal of every self, right? They want absolute power and dominion. But like we saw those 2 agents fighting with each other, selves can also turn on each other because, again, they're separate from the whole. They don't know connection or oneness. They don't see that they're connected. And so the selves in our mind will even go to war with each other, right? I want this, but another self wants that. And those 2 selves will fight in your mind to see which one will win out, which self is more powerful. So this is another example of the split mind that A Course in Miracles talks about, that the ego is engaged in a kind of war in your mind with all the different selves it's created. So it's a system of extreme entropy and chaos. It's kind of self-eating in that regard. Software programs are where the matrix meets your daily life. The reason you keep repeating the same spirals and self-destructive choices. Not because something with you is wrong, but because you are running code designed to serve the structure, not you. So we've all been told, right, that our destructive behavior patterns, psychological disorders, personality flaws, personality disorders, well, this is because something's wrong with you, right? So take these drugs, take this frontal lobotomy surgery, do this procedure, do that procedure, because you're the problem. This is what the matrix wants you to think. You're the problem, not the matrix. So this is kind of the way we reverse engineer our way out of this matrix. And this is what the 8-week program goes into great detail about. And we're going to do extensive work on together. Is first we become aware of our software programs. And then we trace that back to the self that created it. And then based on that self, we can trace it back to the detrimental structure that the self serves. And then we can begin through a series of practices, which we'll talk about in the course, begin to exit that detrimental structure. And just to give you a little foreshadowing, exiting detrimental structures is not always the easiest thing because it often requires a radical reorientation of your lifestyle, of your behaviors. For example, a detrimental structure of violence is cool or whatever. If you're desensitized to violence and you watch lots of violent shows and movies and stuff, and you start to realize, oh, I'm sourcing from a violence structure, egregore in my mind. I love watching violent movies and things. And that is actually very detrimental to my spiritual growth. So I want to exit that structure. Well, guess what you're going to have to do? You're going to have to stop watching violent stuff. You have to break the causal links with that structure, the way that it influences your behavior. So part of exiting the structure, kind of like Neo does, right? He's pulling out all these tubes from his body. And there's like 6 to 8 different tubes in his body. He has to pull them all out one at a time. That's what we're going to do in this program, is identify where are the cords of this structure stuck into me and harvesting my energy, siphoning from me, right? So program by program, agent by agent, structure by structure, we have to reverse engineer our way out of the matrix. Now let's talk about sequences, because per this infographic here, we see that software programs are at the bottom. But as I said, it's technically not the bottom of the chain, because you can't actually see a software program. You can only see what a software program does. Yeah? And what it does is a sequence. All software programs are created to initiate a behavioral sequence. So this is like the front end of the code. Every software program has a sequence through which it operates, and all sequences follow the same pattern: lack, attachment, control. Do you get it yet? Someone's like, wait, Aaron, I'm just not understanding. What is the sequence? Can you mention it again one more time? Lack, attachment, control. We got to drill this stuff, y'all. So think of software programs as the back-end coding of a website, whereas sequences are the front end, what you actually see and experience in your daily life. So every one of you looking at your computer right now are looking at a bunch of ones and zeros, a bunch of binary code on the back end. Every website is just coding, but that's the part you don't see, right? What you see when you enter the URL is the front end, which is the beautiful website you see before you and everything that it can do, right? StreamYard and all that. So think about software programs as the back end coding, which you can't actually see, and sequences are its front end coding, which you can see. And in this way, software programs and their sequences are the same thing. They are one, but it helps us to define them in 2 different terms like this. And I'll explain why. So programs are the what, sequences are the how. A sequence defines how the self goes about fulfilling its lack, its unmet need. So here's the key to exiting the matrix. Sequences are the doorway out, the most visible layer of the matrix architecture within you. So you can only become aware of a program when it's active. And that's the gateway to Christ consciousness. We can become aware of a software program at any point in the sequence and trace it back to the original lack belief. Because again, the lack belief always defines the detrimental structure of consciousness you are sourcing from. So all egregores, every single one that we mentioned, they are all created from an original lack belief. And this is why A Course in Miracles says the belief in lack is the only belief you really need to correct. It's a pretty staggering quote, isn't it? The belief in lack is really the only belief I need to correct? Well, yes, because it is what the entire negative polarity thrives on. Lack is separation, right? Lack is separation from what you need. So lack is the fundamental belief system of the negative polarity, of the matrix, in other words. So here it is in levels, right? Sequences at the bottom. Above that is software programs. Above that are the selves that run those programs. Above that is the structures that run those selves. And above that is the matrix, which runs those structures. Pretty simple hierarchy. Now, let's talk about the archetype of the one. In the Matrix, Morpheus says, speaking of the one, he is the one who was born inside the Matrix, who has the ability to remake the Matrix as he sees fit. It is his coming that will herald the destruction of the Matrix and the end of the enslavement of mankind. And then he says to Neo, don't think you are, know you are. So you can't think your way to Christ consciousness. You can only remember your way to it. And this is why I continue to be so inspired by Yeshua the Nazarene, Jesus Christ, because Jesus, I think, showed us in a very unique way what it looks like to become the one, to break free from the matrix. Because even when they killed him, he became 1,000,000 times more powerful as Neo does, right? And Rome tried to kill Jesus, and then they actually adopted him as their state religion. 300 years later, albeit under a very distorted type of religion, but nonetheless, you see the power that Jesus carried, right? Because he transcended the matrix. He became the Christ, which is anyone who wakes up to the truth of oneness and can live from that awareness permanently. We all have that capacity within us. So the concept of the one in the matrix is perhaps the clearest metaphor for the Christ nature ever produced in a major motion picture. Neo represents the human self undergoing its own spiritual awakening, mirroring Yeshua, the man who, through disciplined practice and deep engagement with the world around him, broke through the illusion and was anointed as the Christ. So notice here, Yeshua was the man who, through disciplined practice, spiritual practice, and deep engagement with the world, broke through the illusion. This is spiritual balance. This is what the Law of One describes as kind of the ultimate practice for transcending third density consciousness, is finding balance between the two planes, the relative and the absolute, or the human and the divine, the physical and the non-physical. So it is called the one because the Christ nature is singular. There's only one Christ consciousness in the universe, and every living being shares it. In that sense, each of us carries the potential to become the one, if we can break free from the detrimental structures, selves, and programs that keep us tethered to the matrix of ego consciousness. So the moment that Neo finally sees the matrix code represents the attainment of Christ vision, the level of spiritual perception where duality dissolves. The world of form is revealed as a mental illusion, and all things are perceived as one great code happening together, right? While under the influence of the matrix, even advanced spiritual seekers still perceive matter as solid, still see the divisions of good and evil, and still navigate a world of separation. So we have one last clip here, which is the famous ending scene of Neo breaking the matrix. Shoots him a bunch, we'll skip that. So this scene right here obviously represents ego death, right? Before Neo wakes up to become the one and breaks the matrix, he dies. And is this not what Yeshua said? If any man wishes to come after me, let him die to himself, take up his cross, and then follow me. Whoever wants to keep his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life will find it. Let's keep going. So he gets awakened again. Now, I want you to watch the way that Neo's behaving when he wakes up and resurrects, as the Christ did, right? And attains Christ vision, sees through the matrix. Watch how his behavior changes.
No.
He is the one.
Woo! Never gets old, does it? So Neo is like zened out right here. Did you notice that? See the deep, slow pranayama breath he takes? I mean, it's such a brilliant way of describing spiritual awakening. All of a sudden, when he wakes up and achieves that Christ vision and sees through the code of the matrix, sees the oneness behind it all, he defeats the agent like he's about to take a nap. Like he's watching paint dry or something, right? He's just almost like too bored to be fighting this agent off. So that is the analogy for spiritual balance. That is the illuminated being, how the awakened one interfaces with the ego. It is balanced between the two polarities of desire and fear. It has no desire to be the ego any longer, but it also has no fear at all of the ego. And that is true transcendence. Balance is transcendence. And Neo depicts that perfectly in this scene, right? So when the matrix influence is fully transcended, what remains is not emptiness, but the omnipresent, ever-existing being that we call God. All evil, all division, all discrepancy vanishes like forgotten shadows from the vision of the one, which beholds all things as itself. In the Gospel of Thomas, Logion 77, Jesus said, I am the light that is over all things. I am all. From me all come forth, and to me all is attained. So this is Jesus speaking much like Neo in that scene, right? He's not speaking as a human person or a persona. He's speaking from the Christ state, from the I am itself. Split a piece of wood, I am there. Lift up the stone and you will find me there. And that last part is Jesus trying to make it as clear as possible. I'm not talking about my human persona. Lift up a rock, you're not going to find a little Jesus hiding under there, all right? Get beyond your physical labels and obsession with the physical body, people. I am the light that is over all things, Jesus says. A human body isn't a light over all things. So he must be speaking from an inner state of Christ consciousness. This is one of the things the Gnostics got much more correct than did the Orthodox Christians of Rome, which pictured everything Jesus said as coming from a body, a person who's claiming all these exclusive things, when in fact, Jesus was claiming universal things. So let's talk about spiritual balance as we close tonight. So the definition of spiritual balance, as I understand it, is that spiritual balancing is the practice of holding two planes of reality in equal awareness simultaneously. So Ra doesn't get into this in the Law of One. And in fact, it's almost frustrating how short the material is. It's not almost, it's very frustrating, if I'm being honest. How short the material is on spiritual balancing in the Law of One, because when I'm reading through it, I'm like, oh man, Don is finally tapping into the real codes, man. Don is on a thread here that I hope he keeps going on. And it's only like a few questions about it. And then he goes back to, tell me how UFOs work, which I can't say that if I was talking to a real ET, I wouldn't have those questions too. But the little bit of information that Ra gives on spiritual balancing has been enough for me to chew on it for many years now, over 10 years now, and put it into practice and contemplate the nature of spiritual balance. And really, I think, get at the heart of what Ra is saying, because Ra only gets into the kind of tertiary or surface level practice of how to balance intense negative emotions. But the first principles that are underlying it, to me, are very clear. And it means we have to come into a balanced awareness of both planes of existence that we live on. The relative or human level, that is us in the matrix, and the absolute or divine plane, that is our eternal Christ nature. So here's how it looks. We can be balanced to either side, either polarity. We can have a relative imbalance or an absolute imbalance. And here's what the difference looks like. Relative imbalances means we're too attracted to the human experience, right? Too bound up in the matrix. We're swept up into programs. We're allowing emotions to run us. We're spiraling in victimhood, revenge, control. And this feeds all the agents, all the selves in our mind. So when you want things, when you have desires in the material world, it anchors you into the relative plane and then imbalances you in that plane. And so your negative emotions are feedback, right? That you are imbalanced. You're too attached, too caught up in the illusion, in the matrix. And so the negative emotion is trying to warn you, right? Don't go further in this direction. Suffering is in this direction. But then likewise, when we begin spiritual study, I think it's inevitable that we also begin to develop imbalances on the absolute plane, meaning we really don't want to be in this freaking matrix anymore. We're sick and tired of this human experience and all of its suffering and myriad of trials and tribulations. We just want out, man. And so we reach for enlightenment like it's a escape door out of the human experience. And this causes us to kind of suppress our emotions, right? Oh, I don't want to feel this anger. That's so unenlightened. I should bypass this. I should, no one says that to themselves, but we find ways of excusing away our negative emotions as invalid. So spiritual bypassing, telling yourself you should not feel the way you feel, feeling guilty for making mistakes. Oh, I should know better than this. These are absolute imbalances, right? You're trying to make the human experience invalid in some way and reach for the divine or the spiritual at the cost of the human. And so this is aversion to the human experience, right? We don't want to be on either extreme because both extremes keep us plugged into the matrix. What we want is, again, that absolute balance that Neo strikes, where he is in the matrix, but not of the matrix. He understands, hey, it's all just code, bro. There's nothing to fear here. And he's completely poised and confident and calm, taking those deep pranayama breaths as he just smokes these agents effortlessly, right? That's because he has no desire and no fear of the matrix. So can you see how that's true enlightenment? I mean, this is the most misunderstood concept in spirituality, that enlightenment means some kind of escaping of the human experience, right? Rising above it. The human is below, the divine is above. And although there's some truth to that in some kind of metaphorical way, what is absolutely true is that the human is the divine, right? The human realm is what the divine realm is doing. And in that sense, it is just as valid. So the human being that you are is every bit as valid as the eternal soul that you are, the Christ nature that you are. And you have to come to know that, such that you never dismiss or bypass or suppress or judge a human experience. No emotions, no thoughts, no mistakes. You see it all as code to learn from, right? So Jesus said in Logion 22 of the Gospel of Thomas, when you make the two into one, and he gives many examples, the left and the right hand, the male and the female, right? Then you will enter the kingdom. He was pointing at this exact truth that enlightenment is spiritual balance. Or as I like to say, and I say in the book, enlightenment is the ability to be in loving relationship with everything. Loving relationship is balance because love eradicates all desire and all fear. Love transcends the pair of opposites. So what we'll talk about in the course, and this is kind of more of the deep work we're going to do together for 8 weeks, is how to begin at the level of the emotion. That's where spiritual balance has to begin. And this is what Ra talks about in the Law of One. We have to begin allowing whatever emotions arise to be fully felt with no resistance or judgment and affirm their complete validity. And we'll talk about why every negative emotion is absolutely valid and just as divine as every positive emotion is. But it's painting a different picture for you, right? It's delivering different information than a positive emotion delivers. And that's the key. So we want to find a way to discharge the emotion in a way that doesn't go into the mental story that the self is ginning up, right? Doesn't cause us to spiral into the story, but just a neutral discharge of the emotion. So if there's sadness, allow yourself to cry without narrating the pain in the story, right? Just cry, just move the tears, weep, wail, do whatever you got to do. The sadness is there to be felt, and it's there to be loved. If it's anger, go scream into a pillow, punch a pillow, cuss, whatever, right? But don't go into the story the anger wants to dramatize. And definitely don't direct the anger at a person and cause them harm, right? If it's fear and anxiety, allow your body to shake and tremble in fear and discharge the stress, right? This is what animals do very well. They need to shake off some stress from a fight or flight response. They just shake. So you can do that too, right? Again, without going into the story. So move the energy like water, without motive, without agenda, and without feeding the self that generated it. Step 2. This is the more nuanced step, is begin to oscillate between the two polarities, the relative and the absolute perspectives. So after, and only after, you have neutrally discharged the emotion to the extent that you actually feel some relief in your body. Once the contraction begins to relax, bring to mind the opposite of what that program was suggesting. And then fully allow that opposite polarity with the same presence of validation. So if there's a story of victimhood and you had to have a big old cry, you feel like such a victim, life isn't fair, woe is me, and you just cried those tears, right? And then you feel a bit of a calm come over you and you've kind of moved that energy. We all know what that feels like, right? After a big cry. Then just gently and neutrally say, now, what if I had an empowered perspective of this situation? What would that be like? And you don't contemplate it as if it's better than the victimhood. Like, oh yeah, victimhood's bad and not okay. Empowerment's better. You're not spiritually balancing if you have that attitude. It's just like, hey, which one's more useful? Which one do I prefer? They're both equally valid. I'm allowed to feel like a victim and I'm allowed to feel empowered. So the question is just, which do I really prefer at the end of the day? And this is how you get clear on who you are and what you really want. A Course in Miracles says, you do not perceive your own best interest. The ego does not perceive its own best interest. So a healthy skepticism of what you think you want is one of the most powerful aids to self-realization. I promise you guys. This is one of the greatest things that I've been able to do for myself on my journey of awakening, is recognize how many freaking times I've been dead wrong about what I thought I wanted. And when I got it, it was just the worst thing ever. Like my first church job, or that girl I chased for 5 years, or whatever. And when I get it, it's just a mess. It leads to suffering. And I go, wow, that whole time I was chasing an illusion. So maybe I don't really know what's best for me. And man, that's a powerful attitude for spiritual balancing, because then you can allow the Holy Spirit, right? Divine intelligence to begin showing you what you actually prefer. And when you can, from a neutral place, contemplate the victim perspective and the empowered perspective. And you don't make either one right or wrong. It's just, hey, which do I really prefer? And you come to find, I would prefer an empowered perspective here. And if you've done that, you have balanced the emotion. It's really that simple. You can do this with lack and abundance, fear and trust, rejection and acceptance. Whatever the negative polarity is, once you've discharged the emotion, signaling it, you just bring to mind its opposite polarity. And you contemplate that perspective for a while. And then you can even oscillate back to the negative, contemplate that, back and forth as many times as you need to, until you feel really clear on which perspective you actually prefer. But you got to get that charged negative emotion out of the way first, so you can actually see the picture clearly, right? So that's the sequence of spiritual balancing, which again, if this sounds like a lot, it's because it's way too much to go over in tonight's masterclass. I could do an entire 2-hour, and will do an entire 2-hour presentation just on this practice. But suffice to say, express the negative emotion, try to perceive the folly of that emotion, where it wants to take you. If you're raging in anger, you're like, I just want to storm into my office and kick over all the computers and desks and tell my boss what an asshole he is. Okay, yeah, go ahead and imagine yourself doing that. Play that scenario out and just go for it, baby. And pretty soon, once you kind of express that anger mentally, you'll be like, oh man, I'm glad I didn't do that. That'd be the dumbest mistake I've ever made in my life, dude. Just imagine the security camera footage, I'd be the next meme on TikTok, dude. So then you say, okay, yeah, that perspective, that polarity, it probably isn't going to take me where I want to go. So what about if I just had peace of mind and acceptance of what's going on, and I was calm and poised, and then you contemplate that. That's this step here. Bring to mind the opposite state. Contemplate that. Again, you're not making this wrong. You're just perceiving what's useful and what's not useful. And those are neutral ways of looking at it. And so then you contemplate the benefits of that new state of peace and poise and balance. And then if you're not settled after one round, which for me, usually I am, you do it again. Express the negative emotion a little bit more, turn it up, perceive where it wants to take you, and then kind of perceive how that's not really what you ultimately want. It's not helpful to the situation. And then go back to the opposite polarity, contemplate that. So you want to get a good gradient of both perspectives, right? Get a good taste of both perspectives to give your soul, your Christ nature, a better shot at identifying what you really want. Because otherwise, it's going to be the ego telling you what it wants, right? So this is what it means to be in the matrix, but not of it. Engaging from sovereignty and no longer at the mercy of the agents, and no longer running code that was never yours. So then another whole module in the course is going to be about identifying sequences. Lack attachment control. This is too much to exhaust tonight, but this is how we, as I said, kind of trace back the lack belief at play. I'm going to pick up a little bit here because we're coming up on an hour and a half. So each emotion is signaling one of these sequences: lack, attachment, or control. Sadness signals lack, anger signals attachment, fear signals control. So in the course, we're going to talk a lot about how to use these signals to know, okay, what is the original lack belief? So here's an example. Let's say you have no idea what structure you're sourcing from. You have no idea what your lack beliefs are. And you even can't identify your attachments. And we're going to do this work together. Like, we're going to have people come on live and interface with myself and go through this process. And let's say somebody that I'm coaching through this says, look, Aaron, I don't even know what I'm attached to, let alone what I'm lacking. Then I'm going to start you at the bottom of the totem pole and say, okay, then let's look at your behavior patterns, right? The sequences you're acting out. Control, the third belief of ego, is the most visible layer. So what actions am I taking to alleviate stress in my life? What actions am I taking that is trying to control life? And then based on that behavior pattern of control and trying to alleviate stress, you can say, okay, based on that information, what attachments must I have? And then you can identify your attachment much easier. And then based on that information, what I'm attached to, then what does that imply I believe I'm lacking? And now you're down to this level, right? And once you identify the lack belief, you basically have the structure identified, because all structures, detrimental structures rather, are birthed, created from lack beliefs. So look at a couple of examples here. Another big thing is that structures are not personal. And you probably already picked up on this, but structures are universal beliefs. So think of them as like umbrella beliefs that plague millions of people. So a structure can't be something like, my particular childhood abandonment wound makes me feel unworthy. That would be your self's lack belief, not the structure, right? Identifying the structure as universal removes the ego's attachment to the story. That's the key to finally breaking out of the matrix. When you see that your lack belief isn't even really yours, it's humanity's lack belief, and it's coming from a detrimental structure that billions of people are sourcing from. Well, then you not only don't feel so alone anymore, but whatever story your mind created doesn't really matter that much anymore. You still love it and forgive it and all of that. I'm not saying you dismiss your past or something, but you see that there's something much greater happening than just my little sad story. And that realization in and of itself helps you to break free from the control. So here's some examples. My value depends on what I do. We talked about that structure. So let's say you have no idea that you're sourcing from this structure. But you say, Aaron, I'm a freaking workaholic, dude. I'm stressed out 24/7 right here. Then I'll say, okay, then John, Susan, Stan, whatever your name is, based on that behavior pattern, that sequence of control, what do you think you might be attached to? Well, I need a promotion at work. I need to make more money. There's some reason why I'm always working so hard. And it's not hard to find that reason. I say, okay, great. So based on your attachment to needing a promotion, needing to make more money, what do you think you might believe you're lacking? And it could be any number of things, but you might identify it as something like, I'm just not good enough as I am without producing, you know? I feel like if I don't make money and ascend up the corporate ladder, I'm just a loser. I'm just a nobody. So there's your structure, right? My value depends on what I do, what I produce in the world. This is a structure that billions of people are sourcing from. Now, here's a case file from me. I have always had a perfectionist self, a self that everything I do has to be absolutely perfect, or I can't release it. I can't show it to anybody. You know, these patterns are very apparent to me. So based on being a perfectionist, what must I be attached to? Why am I a perfectionist? And when I contemplated that, it became clear that, well, it's because I want people to accept me, to accept my work, to accept what I'm doing, right? So therefore I have to control it by being perfect all the time. Well then, okay, why am I so attached to people accepting me and liking me? Well, because I don't believe I'm likable. I don't believe that I'm acceptable as I am, right? I'm lacking acceptance. I'm lacking likability, something like that. So this sources from the structure that billions of people source from. I am defined by the opinions of others. My value depends on the opinions of other people. I need to be liked by people. I mean, is this not what runs our cultural zeitgeist, y'all? This is what 90% of social media content is predicated on. People are trying to earn the acceptance of others. People think they're defined by their social media content and how many likes they get and how many comments they get. And if somebody doesn't like their post and they post something negative, it ruins their whole day. That's because I'm defined by the opinions of others. So there's your structure, right? That through this process, I was able to identify. So here's the point of power, our awareness of our behavior patterns, our sequences. Now, this is something, follow me here for a second, kind of a funny way of breaking down the matrix that I came up with. The matrix cannot be exited directly. This is obvious, right? If I just say, hey, everybody, we have 300 some odd people on the live, 335, all 335 of you, exit the matrix now, do it. And you're all just kind of like twiddling your thumbs, right? Like, what does that even mean, you know? So the matrix cannot be exited directly. You can only dissolve the detrimental structures that the matrix creates. But you can't just dissolve detrimental structures themselves. You can only dissolve the selves that those structures generate. But you can't just dissolve selves. You can only starve the programs that they create. And you can't just starve a program. You can only become aware of the sequences that that program runs. So this is our point of power, is our awareness of the sequences of how we act out these detrimental structures. The entire architecture begins to weaken, not from the top down, but from the inside out. You escape by catching the smallest, most immediate expression of its influence in this moment. Every time you become aware of a software program and choose not to act it out, you unplug one more cord from your true self, your Christ. One less feed of energy flowing back to the agents. One less battery powering the machines. So the Christ in you is infinite and eternal, right? It is like an infinite battery that the ego matrix feeds off of. Because again, an illusion is not self-sustaining. It needs a power source to stay alive. So as long as you're giving some of your belief to the matrix's structures, it's able to feed off of you, the Christ nature in you. And so that's why when the Christ awakens, the Christ unplugs those cords. So this is a lot like what Jesus said in the Gospel of Thomas, Logion 98. The Father's kingdom is like a person who wanted to kill someone powerful. While still at home, he drew his sword and thrust it into the wall to find out whether his hand would go in. And then he killed the powerful one. Such an epic quote from Jesus here. Jesus had the most gangster analogies for spiritual growth, man. This is an incredible analogy, you guys. What Jesus is saying here is that spiritual awakening, apprehending the kingdom, right? Seeing reality is like somebody who wants to kill a powerful man, but he's not sure if he tries to stab this powerful man, that he has the strength to thrust into him. kind of an extreme analogy, right? So he goes home and he tries to thrust his sword through a wall. Say, hey, if I can thrust it through this wall, I'm confident I can thrust it through the powerful man. So it's like practice on the lesser to master the greater is the idea here. You don't need to exit the matrix. If you can thrust your sword through the programs of the ego, right? If you can become aware of its sequences, you can exit the matrix. Pretty epic. So this is what it means to become the one. Not a single chosen savior, but anyone who has reclaimed enough awareness to re-enter the matrix and help liberate others. By freeing yourself, you offer freedom to all. The matrix can only control the ego. It cannot touch the Christ. Only the Christ can become truly aware. The code reveals itself for what it always was, an illusion. So as Jesus said in Logion 1:13, the kingdom of heaven is already spread out upon the earth, but men are unaware of it. So it's a game of awareness we're playing. And even to become aware of your structures and your negative core beliefs is you gaining freedom from them. By the time you're even aware of a detrimental structure, you're ready to exit the structure. And so this is what we're going to do together for 8 weeks live here in 40U for 2 hours every week. We're going to go through this entire format that we've gone through tonight, escaping your self-made matrix. Starting Saturday, March 7th, I'm going to be leading a live 8-week intensive course to teach you how to do this deep inner work presented here today, to systematically dismantle the invisible architecture that has been running your life from the shadows. So here's what the course will look like. Every week for 8 weeks, you'll join a live 2-hour call that includes a full 60-minute video lesson breaking down that week's core concept. So we're going to take each little piece we talked about tonight and dive deep into each one and really kind of unpack a lot of the nuances we didn't get into tonight. And then after that, we'll do 60 minutes of live Q&A and actually doing the work from that lesson. So I'm going to give you like the hands-on instructions of what doing this work actually looks like. So the first hour is like the input, the second hour is like the output, doing the work together in real time. And there's something really powerful, you guys. This is why I love doing these live cohorts, because when we do the work together, it's always more powerful, exponentially more powerful than doing it alone. Because watching somebody else move through a structure that you're also sourcing from, it's like you're gaining your own freedom at the same time as they are, because we're all one. Your problems are my problems. Your shadows are my shadows. We're all experiencing the same human archetypes, right? So doing the work together is just a powerful code, man, to unlocking this kind of freedom. So this isn't just a course you watch, it's a course you experience. You'll have the opportunity to come on live and have me personally help you identify your detrimental structures, programs, and selves, and begin unplugging, along with a community of spiritual seekers doing the same work alongside of you. And of course, we have a live community every day in 40U where we'll be having deep conversations and facilitating these reflections together all throughout the week, and then doing the work together on our weekend call. So the curriculum will look like this. There's modules 1 through 4. Kind of the same concepts we touched on tonight. And then modules 5 through 8 is more of the actual hands-on doing the work. We'll talk about spiritual balancing at great length in these 2 modules, and really the last 3 modules, and kind of putting all the pieces together so that by the end of these 8 weeks, you have no more questions about exactly how to do this work, and using these concepts and frameworks as like a laser accurate tool to get right to the root of the problem. And we might even teach you some, I don't want to give too much away, but some really powerful tools like muscle testing to test whether you're congruent with certain structures or not. So who's this course designed for? Why would you want to take this course? Well, it's designed for anyone who wants a step-by-step system for doing this deep spiritual work, identifying limiting beliefs, detrimental structures, and healing from the lifelong traumas and behavior patterns that have held you back. In this course, you won't just learn about the matrix, you'll learn how to exit it. And that's really, I want to stress again, like what I've tried to put together here is a true method for exiting the matrix. So as I said at the beginning, This is available for just $44 a month for joining our student membership. And if you're already in our student membership, then you already get access to this course. Month-to-month membership, cancel anytime, no contracts. But we do have a special offer tonight. You can join tonight for just $7 for your first 14 days. So essentially, you can try out the first week of the program for just $7. The program starts March 7th, so that's about 10 days from now. But in the meantime, you can enjoy all the other courses we have and the curriculum we have in the membership as well. We have 8 foundations courses you'll get access to, all the Jesus Way courses and content, all the live masterclasses I've led. There's too much content for you to consume in a week. So you can definitely keep yourself busy before March 7th. But March 7th is when we start live together. And I cannot be more excited to get into this work with you guys in about 10 days' time. So the link to register is in the chat. It should be pinned there in the chat. And with that being said, I'm going to stop my screen share. And let's do some Q&A, you guys. I threw a lot of things at you, and I'm sure that you have some questions about that. So I'm going to peruse through the chat here and find some questions we can pull out. And I'm going to put my blue blocks on because I know these aren't really matrix glasses, but you got to protect that third eye, right?